Welcome to our talk, to our panel, little panel, with the title Remembering Louise Bourgeois. It's under the label Art History. I'm an art historian and I like art history, but I think if I look at Louise Bourgeois, especially on this fair, she's very contemporary and we shouldn't see her as a historical person. She's very much with us, I think. It's great that you came, and it's great that you came. That is Tracey, Emin, wonderful artist from Britain, who had the privilege of working with Louise Bourgeois on one of her last pieces. That's Deputy Director and Chief Curator of the Guggenheim, Nancy Spector, and that's legendary assistant, longtime assistant of Louise Bourgeois. We are talking about her, how we met her, and we talk about her art, and we talk about how it was to work with her. And I'd like to start with reminding you that we, the Beyeler Fondation, has a nice piece here on the art fair at our booth, and that is called Cell 12 Oval Mirrors, and it's about the difficulties to communicate. And I was just talking to Nancy that we were really surprised that an artist who knew really every important artist of the later 20th century and the 21st century had so many apparent difficulties to communicate in a way. So we met her. It was difficult for us to sort of talk to her. You met her. You had a difficult first meeting as well, and I think your first meeting was not very smooth either.
No.
You had this famous fight, which sort of started your.
It wasn't a fight.
It was not a fight.
Okay. Yeah, I was organizing a show, and I included a piece of hers in this exhibition, and she came by and hated the installation. She said, "I'm taking my piece out of the show. This is ridiculous." And she was just. And so we went to have a cup of tea, and I tried to get her to calm down, not to take the piece out of the show, which was a really important piece. This piece called Coyote. And we were walking back from food, which was in Soho, this thing, and she fell down. Mm-hmm. And this is after all this aggressivity. I realized how vulnerable she was, and I just picked her up. We walked back to the gallery, and then she calmed down, and we worked it out. She kept the piece in the show, and that was the beginning of the friendship, really. But she could be very aggressive when she's afraid. Some people withdraw. When Louise is afraid, she attacks.
Right.
So I think she was fearful to show. She hadn't shown that much. And I think the idea of having this work exposed to her made her very uptight.
At that time. You met her at the same time, more or less, or a little later?
I met her in the late 80s.
Right.
And I was working on a collection guidebook at the Guggenheim and realized that she was not represented in the collection, and I was young and brazen and made an appointment with her at her townhouse and just asked if she would donate a work to the collection, which in retrospect I can't believe I did that. And she very quickly responded, "Why should I do that? The Guggenheim has done nothing for me." And looking back through our exhibition history, it's true. We had never shown her work, we had never collected her work, and I felt kind of as a personal mission that I wanted to rectify that. And around the time that we acquired the Panza collection, we deaccessioned some works, and there were funds left over from the purchase of that collection, and we worked with her gallery and with Jerry to select 5 major pieces. And with that actually did come some gifts, because Louise in the end was quite generous. So we acquired some drawings that were gifts. And then the retrospective that came from the Tate,
Right.
I think in some ways, closed that circle.
Right. And you did the retrospective in 2008 of an artist who liked the spiral form in a spiral architecture. So that was really something very, very special. And you met her 4 or 5 years ago?
I met her about 5 years ago, maybe 5.5 years ago. And my New York gallery, Lehman Maupin, asked me is there anything I'd like to do in New York? And I said, I'd love to meet Louise Bourgeois. So they made the phone call, and then I was lucky enough to go and meet her, except she shouted at me. Yeah, Jerry will vouch for this. She wanted to know how many times had I been to New York before, and I said, yeah. She said, how, when, how many times? And I said, oh, I don't know, maybe 20 times. When? I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. And then she just went off in French and shouted at me. And she was kind of angry, why hadn't I been to see her before? That was where the aggression was. And I didn't know that you could just go and see her, but it turns out that you can't, and you couldn't. And then I gave her a present, which she kind of threw across the table, which Jerry then politely picked up. It was a hat. And Jerry put it on, and then she knocked it off your head. And I was thinking, oh, this is awful, this is a nightmare, she doesn't like me, I feel terrible. But I was absolutely wrong, I was totally wrong. And I left the house thinking, oh, this is like a nightmare, and I shouldn't have gone. And not understand, in retrospect, looking back, of course, exactly what Jerry was saying, she liked me a lot. And that was a great meeting. There was like a vulnerability, and there was like feeling there, emotion. Mm-hmm. So.
Well, the meeting curators was different, and I had that very strange thing that I came to this room and I didn't know what to say. I was seeing red watercolor, women giving birth and big breasts, and I really had a feeling of great intensity and that someone really was painting with blood. I had the feeling, and I was sitting there, and I really didn't know what to say. And it was a great relief that Nancy apparently didn't know what to say either. So when she first met her, she was a very, very strong personality, and it was a lot of misunderstanding perhaps first. I mean, she warmed up a little, but she had this habit of talking to Jerry about the person visiting her, the third person, like, tell him meaning me, which I thought was very, very strange. But, meeting artists was different than from meeting curators, I think.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure. I think it had to do with, one was her mood, really. I mean, if she was in a bad mood, whoever came that day, it was like, you're in for it. You know what I mean? It was sort of bad luck. But I think genuinely, people were coming to meet her, and they were pumping her, and she was like, all these people are coming, I don't want to talk about myself. It's not interesting. It's a one-way conversation. She goes, I don't know who this person is, I don't know who they're sleeping with, I don't know, what they're doing, she goes, it's not an equal conversation. She says, it makes me bored. She goes, I want to know about them. So my job usually was, she'd put out liquor, and she'd go, keep filling that glass. She'd like to get the person drunk, and then the person would open up, and the person would be talking about everything, and that's what she really liked.
Right.
Really.
I recall actually that there were many occasions, and I didn't actually go that often, but where we would really be sitting in silence while I pretended to sip that schnapps. But I also felt that she was completely available through her work and through her writings, that I didn't need to ask questions, which is unusual.
That is right. Yeah, that is right.
Well, when I first went, what shocked me most of all was that everything in the house was grey. Everything seemed grey. Everything was like one colour, apart from, as you say, the really bright works that were on the floor that kind of really stood out. And then there was Louise, and she really stood out. But everything else in the house just kind of was just like a background to this kind of like strange kind of, I know, she was really formidable and really strong personality, and everything else just seemed to be the background to that. And that was the first thing which I thought when I first met her. And we had a mutual friend, Stuart Morgan, and that's when I first came across Louise's work. But I thought Louise was a young American artist when I first saw her work at the Tate Gallery, 1995, I think.
Right.
Yeah, and so Louise knew and remembered that I was friends with Stuart, because Stuart had spoke to her about me. And there was a very strange thing. After Louise had shouted at me and saying, why why haven't you been here before? Why are you coming now? Kind of thing. She then showed me a film of Stuart Morgan sitting in the chair that I was sitting in, and at the same time, Louise's film Bridget was filming me sitting in that chair. So it's this kind of full circle thing. And Stuart had died about 10 years ago, and it was almost like Louise was saying to me, have you come to see me now because you think I'm going to die? Is this why you've come? Well, watch, you don't know what's going to happen. And that's what I was thinking, and it was a kind of a strange thing. It was like a strange performance, and like you were trapped in something.
Well, back to you. It's really interesting. She's very present through her work. She's very present through her writings. But you told me she never really thought of the public when she did her work. I mean, that's again something.
I think she always used to say, the work was more her than her physical presence, and I think that what she produced, that was it. She didn't really need to justify it. She didn't need to talk about it. She didn't need to do anything other than she had the necessity to make it. And she didn't want, she did talk. Louise had this thing of almost being afraid she would talk, and because I think she thought her work is so confessional and so autobiographical and all that, when people would do these interpretations and they were way off the wall, I think she kept writing and talking as a way to try to set the record straight, because she was already psychoanalyzing herself. And the work, people have a tendency to psychoanalyze the work because it's anyway, so you had this thing, and I think for her, I think a lot of times she basically spoke to set the story straight, but ideally she didn't really like, she didn't really want to talk about the work so much. She's much more interested in talking about life, like emotions, what was your relationship to your father? She was much more interested in, she was not interested in art history, she was not interested in, this work or related to this. If you said something wrong, she would challenge you and she'd set the record straight, because she did know art history and she did know a lot about art. But essentially that's not, when people were coming over, she wanted to know about life, your life, what you did, where you're coming from, why you do the things you do, what do you want, how do you feel. It was those are the things that interest her, really. Or when people brought their work, she would, look at their work, and she would have this amazing ability. I think she could really look at the work and come up with something that was really pretty much spot on. And I think that she had that ability to really, she had this salon where the house was open for many artists, and I think she really enjoyed these people bringing their work to her, and she would look at it, and if she liked the work, she was very intelligent, very sensitive, but if she didn't like the work, you were in trouble.
You never went to the Salon, Tracey?
No, I didn't know there was a Salon. And also, when the salons were happening, I thought Louise Bourgeois was this young American artist whose work I'd seen. I know it sounds, I'm being honest. I'm being really honest. When I first saw her work, I thought that maybe she was the same age as me, because the work was so vibrant and so alive and so current. And that's why Stuart Morgan, when he curated the show at the Tate, that's why he put her work in it, because it really suited the times that we were living in. And as a female artist, Louise is a fantastic example of a female artist who got better and better and stronger and stronger. And, she's a fantastic role model for that. And timeless, which is really important.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. How was actually working with her? Did you, when you prepared the Guggenheim show, you went to see her and you were talking with her about the show, really? Or?
Well, in this case, the exhibition was curated by Francis Morris and Marie-Claude Bernardac and Jonas Storvey. So I adapted it to the Guggenheim space, which took quite a bit of choreography because, of course, the architecture is so eccentric and different. But there, at that point in time, Louise was not that engaged in the checklist. Of course, I worked very closely with Jerry, and I always felt working with Jerry that I was working with Louise, and that if there was any decisions that I was making that would be problematic, I would have heard about it.
Right.
Louise didn't get involved, in exhibitions. It's hard to, she really did not want to get that involved with exhibitions. There were lots of projects, and to her it was just a distraction.
She didn't really see the Guggenheim show, did she?
No. At a certain point, Louise stopped going to shows, period. I mean, you know, at a certain point she was not interested. But she would be in, if someone came to the house and said, oh, I saw the show at the Guggenheim, and they would talk about it, she would be interested. But to get involved in it, for her, it was just a total distraction. I think it made her anxious, and psychologically, the idea of having a show, it just was like, it wasn't a good thing for her, you know, in a way. But she'd be happy if someone came and communicated or said, I got something from this piece, that she was receptive to. But the idea of shows and all that was not, because Louise is very obsessed. She's very interested in what she's working on. That's it. Everything else just sort of falls away. It's really focused on that. Very obsessive that way.
She didn't really leave the house for...
No, she had bouts of agoraphobia, and at the end of her life, she just said, you know, but she wasn't a hermit. She just decided, that's it, I want to stay and work, and she just sort of reduced, you know, to the point where the work was really everything at that point in the last 10 years of her life.
So how was working with her? I mean, you didn't really help her?
No, I'm not a sculptor and all that. I mean, you know, I organized everything so she could work.
Right.
We had good days and bad. She was at pink days and blue days. We had days where it was horrific, big fights, and then we had days where it was great. I mean, it was, you know, Louise was very up and down emotionally. So, but as I spend time with her, I would try to figure out what's causing the aggressiveness, or why is she depressed, or this or that, and try to. When she was working, she was happy. That was, I knew as long as she kept working, then kept her very calm. I mean, it was very therapeutic in that sense. When she wasn't working, she became extremely anxious and then aggressive and obsessive in a way.
And how did this happen, Tracey? You made this wonderful series of, you have it here actually, the book, of drawings with her. Thank you. That's wonderful. If you haven't looked at it, you should. It's a series of drawings. It's a collaboration.
Yeah.
Really.
It's a complete collaboration so Jerry said Louise would like to make a collaboration with you. You can do it however you want. Either you send something to Louise, or Louise will send something to you. And then, I don't know, a couple of months later, I just got this roll of all these prints, these amazing prints, and I got this message: you can do whatever you want. You can turn them into pulp, you can make them into paper mache, you can draw all over them, write all over them, just do whatever you feel like doing. And when I opened them out, they were so beautiful just as they were. I actually didn't want to touch them. I thought, this is just, I can't touch them, they're finished, they're complete. And then I kept saying, have you done them yet? Getting this message, and I go to New York because I haven't done it. And I got so nervous about these things, and they were so precious to me. And to me, they were perfect. And I just didn't want to touch them. And the only way I thought I could touch them is if I had nothing else in my mind. So the next time I saw Louise, I said, I'm really sorry, but I want these things to be complete within themselves, and I don't want to be thinking of anything else. So give me, and she said to me, you've got time, don't worry. She said, you've got all the time, just take your time, do it when you want. So about 2 years later, nearly 2 years later, I finished all my shows, and then on a Sunday afternoon, I got my printing materials out in my studio when it was very silent, and then I drew on Louise's prints. And every single one came out perfect. Every one to me was complete, and every single one looked like, it didn't look like a collaboration, it looked like one artist had made it. And the important thing for me was that I didn't want to destroy Louise's beauty and the fragility of the watermarks and the colours. And I didn't want to just add something, I wanted it to feel like one thing. And then I rolled them up, FedExed them to New York, and then I jumped on a plane and I went to New York, and I was so nervous about what she was going to think. So Jerry should say the next bit.
So what Tracey was going, but I had to roll them before, and I said, Louise, I'm going to show you what Tracey did, and you could then decide if you wanted to go back into it. You know, Tracey was fine, because I told Tracey maybe Louise wants to add on top of what you did, and then maybe we'd send it back. I mean, it was a very open-ended process. We didn't really know what would happen. We didn't even know if Tracey would do it. At a certain point, it was like, well, maybe she's just not going to do it. We don't really know. And so I rolled it out, and Louise was like looking at them, and she was, you know, she was not very talkative. She goes, said, what do you think? She goes, they're perfect. I like them. I don't want to do anything. That's fine. Then Tracey came, and then we unrolled them again, and Louise was like, that's fine. And then the edition was made from those things, and she was happy. You know.
Yeah, it was really brilliant, wasn't it? It was smiling, all of us smiling. And I didn't realise just how I was petrified of her, let alone making this work with her. And also I felt like I was holding hands with history, even though you said this isn't about history. Of course it was for me.
Yeah.
And the respect and admiration that I had for her was phenomenal. And I was shaking. I was so worried about what I wanted her to really like them, but I had to respect her enough to know whatever she said would be. And also I knew she could be in a bad mood, like Jerry was saying.
That was a good day, so
Yeah.
it was a good moment. But, no, if she didn't like it, she would have said, okay, you know, they're gonna. She would have cut it up, or
they'd have gone.
You know. But
Well, of course, it has something to do with history. I mean, she was nearly 100 years old. I mean, this year we commemorate her 100th birthday. She was born on Christmas Day, 1911, and of course this is something historical. And this is, but I think what interests me, and I actually was working on I did an exhibition at the Beyeler Fondation about her, and I was sort of trying to make dialogues between key works of her and the collection of classical modern art of the Beyeler collection, and I was realizing that most of the artists I was sort of making the dialogue with, she knew personally, and she had a relation, and she was the pupil of Fernand Léger, and she knew Barnett Newman. Didn't like much of his work, but she knew him. She knew Giacometti said something very interesting about him. She knew Francis Bacon, and of course this is about history, and I wrote a little book on the show, and the epilogue is actually that one should continue in doing a show on how she influenced contemporary artists and how she influenced you, and you will be part of it. I named you, of course, and that chapter and others. I mean, how would that show look like? It's a difficult question, but Nancy, whom would you include, and what was really, when you look at contemporary art, I'm more a specialist in modern art. I'm not really a contemporary art specialist, but what was really her impact on contemporary art?
Well, when I did the exhibition at the Guggenheim, I really thought about it as a contemporary art exhibition, which is interesting to hear what you said, Tracey, about that. Of course, there was the historical dimension because we included works from the late 40s, but in my mind, it was a contemporary show, and I was making it for our audiences that come to see contemporary art. In terms of her impact on the art world, I think key would be to think about her influence on a generation of women in the 70s, where she wasn't actively exhibiting, but certainly actively not exhibiting in the 60s, but some presence in the 70s, but giving license to women to delve into their subjectivity, to work with the body, and of course she'd been doing this for years. So that I think was a really critical point that I was hoping would be evident in the exhibition. But in terms of her work's presence today, I think of artists like Matthew Barney, who I've worked with his deep obsession with the malleability of gender, which of course if you look at many of Louise's sculptures that are both male and female, and to that extent someone like Bob Gober,
right.
Again working with the body but with this fluid notion of gender. Someone like Berlinda de Broekery, for instance, who's even a younger generation. That wonderful tension between abstraction and figuration that Louise mined and you see in younger artists. So I think where people may not be paying direct homage, or there's a consciousness of her work among these younger artists.
I mean, one has to keep in mind that she started in New York in a totally male-dominated macho artist society, and she was taking part in these artist sessions presided by Robert Motherwell. And Hans Hofmann said, only men have wings for art at that time, and she really, she was very, very criticized for. What I tried in at the Beyeler Foundation is to show, to see her work formally, as a form, as a response to abstract expressionism. But on the other hand, she always had this narrative. She always had the story, and she was very criticized for that during that time. And so she really sort of broke free for.
But I also think one thing is, I think when I first started to work with Louise and I saw the work, by not having one sort of body of work that was like the signature body of work, that she could work in different materials and different scales and going between abstraction and figuration. She did a performance, we shot some video, people don't know, and then she would, I think that was a certain license for a lot of people to see. You didn't have to come up with this one look, market-driven sort of product. And I think that, as I said, when I first started to show the week, it was very hard for people to absorb what she did precisely because she didn't do one thing. People would come into a room and say, it's like a group show. I said, no, it's one artist. And it took a while. I think when the show came at Moment 82, it was the first time that you saw a lot of it. Even then, it was still, hard for people to really get at it was. But then slowly, I think people see that if you see the work and you see the Guggenheim show and all that, you see that there is a sensibility and that she is very formally inventive, and there is a consistency to her vision of emotions in the world that she portrays, regardless of the material, regardless of the scale, regardless of the imagery. And I think that a lot of people have said to me, like, wow, now it's more common. You see a lot of artists really expanding the possibilities in a strange way, which then it was very difficult.
But there was no need to repeat herself very often because she didn't have the pressure of the market.
Because there was no market, but she didn't understand. There's certain artists that she liked. She goes, can you imagine they spent the whole life repeating the same thing? She couldn't understand that, like how it would be so dull. I couldn't even get Louise to cast 6 of the same thing because she'd want to change it. And I said, you can't change it. This is done, because otherwise it's very boring. The production end of things becomes extremely boring. She wasn't really interested in production. If she wasn't in the mood, she wouldn't work.
Being a much younger artist and looking at her work, where it was really strong was her psychological language that she invented, that she stuck to, and she didn't care what people said about that. It was her language, and she invented it, and her dialogue with herself, and there was repetition there, and that I really liked, because people questioned again and again and again. She'd go back to the same questions, she'd ask herself the same things, but at different stages within her life. So she was always coming up with different answers, and that is really inspiring when you look at someone's body of work, because it means that they're always thinking, they're always reinventing, but they're always going back to the core or the essence of what they truly are. And also her scale of work, I wish I could work in her, like her scale is phenomenal, from tiny pieces of paper to really delicate sewing, and then these giant, sort of fantastic, giant, monumental sculptures. There's very few artists in history that have been able to do that, to make that leap, and she's a woman, which is exceptional. So she was working within a man's world with men's materials half the time, like these giant, heavy, weighted things that didn't appear to be heavy. They just appeared to have the same kind of feeling as the small. It was all the same emotional, energy and whatever. And that's what made us, for me, that's what makes her work exceptional and very different.
Something I tried to do with the Guggenheim show was to tease out the muscularity of the work, because I felt that a number of recent exhibitions, the Tate included, and the installation that was on view at Dia Beacon, kind of showed her more of the smaller scale, the kind of tinkerer, and I felt that this would be really an important moment to show, as a woman artist, the bravado, an ability to work on this massive scale with heavy materials. And certainly we had smaller scale and delicate works on papers and things, but that was, in my mind, something I really wanted to bring out.
And you made these wonderful cells. We have the cell here, and if you haven't seen it, please go and have a look. Yes, I speak a little louder, thank you. for reminding me. I'm always sort of trying to make myself unseen. Thank you. The cells. I mean, the cells. I mean, she had the first museum show in '82 when she was 71 years old. I mean, she was. It's incredible. In
She
a way.
never had a studio. You have to realize she never had a studio until 1980. She just got a studio. So, had she not gotten a studio, she would not have made the cells because she was working in her brownstone, which is a very narrow brownstone. So, I think the cells really, when she had the possibility to have more space, she was able to work larger. And I think that, you know, the development of the cells came out of her being in a bigger space herself. And I guess with the cells is when she started to incorporate, you know, Louise's work is pretty much abstract, but with the cells she started using things that belonged to her. And she wanted to create her own architecture to house these things. So there were things that she made or carved together with things that belonged to her or things that had certain value, or whether it was a piece of clothes or a particular tool or something that she had. And I think that, you know, the cells came out of that point where she was actually introducing things in her life. That was really the impetus. And also, I think when she started to show, even though she wasn't involved with the shows, you know, she would make something, you know, and it would be in a big room. The scale was always, by creating her own architecture, she set her own scale. So even if it was in a big space as big as this hall, you really enter the cells and it's a closed world and everything is defined. It really was her way of dealing with space and being in a bigger studio in Brooklyn. I mean, there's no way she would have made the cells without having a studio. And I think that
the brownstone must have burst of works. I mean, it must have been really.
No, she had her
full.
basement. She just had her when I first met her, the basement was just packed with, you know, 40 years worth of work just shoved everywhere. Under the bed, there were drawings, there was sculpture, wherever you go. I mean, the whole house was really, at a certain point, her husband died in '73, and at that point, the whole house really became like a studio, except for her husband's library. I mean, she would work, you know.
The house really became the
It became like a cell. It became
cell,
another
yeah.
cell. I mean, if you go into her house, I mean, the way she lived and what she produced is pretty much the same. I mean, that's that same kind of space. She had little doorways and little escape routes. If people came in, she had a little back door. She had little spiral staircases. I mean, it's very architecturally.
Describe what the lower basement's like.
Yeah, the lower basement is all these stones. It was a stone floor, so all these little boulders, because the water used to come up. And that's where she first had the instruction of the father, was set up in this basement, very low ceiling with these stones. Pretty amazing. I mean, in a way.
well, the cells really. What she really, for me, the reacting to the cells is a very personal thing, and that's really what I. Again, as you said, Tracey, it's this very personal feeling of getting involved, and it has something voyeuristic, wouldn't you think? I mean, you look in someone's life.
But a lot of the cells, which you don't enter because they're fragile, but when
Right.
if you were one person, you're in the studio, you'd walk in the cells and you would walk in.
Okay.
I think that voyeur aspect is there because there were windows in certain of the doors and all that, and she was aware of that, and she talked about that. But a lot more of the cells were really, the viewer was really invited to be in and should enter, but given the situation of the exhibitions, they had to be closed off. But it was, in certain cells, you were meant to get inside and sit down. You were not supposed to, you know.
But
do
in
it.
many cases, there's this underlying tension of violence with many of the walls have broken glass or jagged wires, which I've always found to be very interesting, even though the interior may have these very poignant, carved hands and things.
No, there's definitely violence in the work. I
Yeah.
mean, there is violence in the work. There's no question about it. I think that, you know, she was a violent person. I mean, Louise had a lot of anger.
Okay, are there any questions? We are open to questions, if you like. Yes, please. Very loud. There's a microphone coming.
I'm curious. You mentioned that Louise was interested in her visitor. Could you tell us a little bit about her background? because perhaps that would help us better understand her work.
Her background, I'm not sure. You mean her background as an artist? What?
Biographical background.
That's a long story.
In a nutshell, she was born in Paris in 1911 into a family of tapestry restorers. Her family wanted her to continue in the tapestry restoration, hence the relationship to the symbol of the spider as a weaver to her mother. But Louise was very smart. She studied mathematics and philosophy at the Sorbonne. She got a degree. And then when her mother died, she became depressed. She abandoned mathematics and began studying art. She met an American who was doing research in Paris, married him, and in 1938 she came to New York. And then she began showing upon her arrival in 1938. And then she basically, when she was living in New York, she had 3 kids right away, and then she slowly began making sculpture.
Yeah, but Jerry, that's a lot of people don't know how incredibly brainy she was. She could have done anything.
Yeah.
Just a follow-up question. Do we know the source of her anger?
I think there's many sources of the anger, but I think it might be better to read the books. I mean, it's very hard to, but I think there was a lot of frustration with her father, or a lot of, frustration, basically, when she came to New York, she had 3 kids right away, so she was juggling her career as a mother, as a wife, and as an artist. I think she had a lot of anger in that. I think she had a lot of anger in the relationship to women, the status of a woman in the art world and in society in general. I mean, she was sort of, there was lots of anger, but I think there was also a lot of fear, and I think the fear fed into a lot of anger. I think sometimes people who are fearful can be very angry.
Any other questions?
Hi, Tracey. I'm Gigi from Zurich, Switzerland.
Hi.
I had met Louise about 8 years ago. I'd written about her for the Beyeler magazine. Do you remember me, Jerry? 8 years ago. And meanwhile, I really loved her, so I was devastated when she passed away. I would like to know from you, Tracey, what was it, that one basic thing that you could share it with us that you learned and you love about Louise?
I'd like to say, well, I think collaborating with someone that was so much older than me and so much more intelligent than me and so much more academic than me, I had to really think so carefully about what I was doing and really and trust her and trust the situation. And so you're not going to believe this, but it gave me some humility. Really. Really, honestly. Because I knew how important it was. I was nervous, I was frightened about this thing that I was taking on, working with her, and I knew it was important. But I didn't know how important, because I didn't think she was going to die. I had this idea that she'd lived till she was 101. I don't know why, I just thought 101. I had this in my head. And I wish now that we'd done more things together. I wish but I'm lucky enough, the fact that I work, and as I said this thing earlier, I felt like I was holding hands with history. And maybe, if I live till I'm 97 or something, maybe I'll find an artist who I really like, who I respect, that's much younger than me, and I'll collaborate with them. And maybe then they'll do it in 100 years' time. Who knows? But that's what I learned. I learned something about the moment and the feeling and this thing of holding hands and making something work. It was brilliant. And also I thought she was incredibly beautiful, really beautiful woman, and inspirational as well. So.
Hello, my name is Bruno Giuliani. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the piece that's exhibited here, the mirror piece from the Fondation.
Well, basically, Louise was always interested in mirrors. I mean, that started out from the early works, but I think she started these sort of environments where people would come and interact, where they would meet someone. You're supposed to, basically, one person sits in the middle of that cell, and then another stranger is supposed to come by, and you're supposed to have this dialogue. And while you two are having this encounter, there are other people watching you, so watching the encounter. So someone is watching the encounter so you're being observed. So it's just sort of this behavioral kind of thing, which is sort of the prototype for her towers, which she did for the opening of the Tate Modern, where also with the mirrors, and you're watching yourself, because you could look at yourself, and the mirrors are distorted, so you're getting very different perspectives, very different reflections. And it was this idea of like, when you interact with someone, what's really going on, what's happening between the two of you, what's happening to someone's perception of what's happening to the two of you. So it had all this sort of idea of perspective of what's really happening and how you're interpreting that and what does it really mean.
Any other questions? No? Thank you very much.
No, that's
Someone
Oh,
has-
sorry. All right. Right.
Hi, I'm Jan Garden Castro, and I reviewed the Tate Modern show, and I wrote 2 cover stories on Louise Bourgeois. And I'm wondering the origin of the she-wolf. I've heard 2 stories, one from Louise when she was older, and when I was at the Louvre on my way to the Tate Modern, I actually saw a medieval piece that was a wolf with multiple breasts, and I was wondering if Louise had ever seen that, or what the origin of that piece was.
For those of you who don't know, the she-wolf is this animal that Louise made in black marble from the 80s. And it's this multi-breast figure without a head, with just like an architectural sort of structure on the top. But it was more, in that particular piece, I mean, she talked about it in relationship to her own mother, and the idea of there's a little figure underneath the haunch of the figure. And it's more about a mother and child relationship in a strange way. I mean, I think that's really what it's about. It's more of a mother and child. And Louise knew history very well. I mean, so the multi-breast thing, I mean, she was aware of all the historical origins. So
She was a trained Louvre guide. wasn't
yeah,
she?
Louise was a guide in the
She-
Louvre, so
she knew it very well.
that, you know.
Yes. Microphone, right.
My name is Mirna. I wanted to know, she's called a lot of works maman. Has she ever called anything papa?
Well, there's the destruction of the father. I would say that's the closest thing. No. I mean, the title Maman is only very late in life. There's no early work, Maman. I mean, that was really something that came much later in her life. I mean, at a certain point, a lot of the late work is more in dialogue with her mother. I think she was getting frail, and I think she was thinking psychologically she needed a mother, and I think that, I think it had to do with, you know, all the late work is really, you know, from a psychoanalytic point, it was delving into the relationship to her mother and her sense of being a mother, but mostly her needing a mother because she was getting fragile.
My name is Adriana, and I would like to know if each of you could tell us a unique quality that Louise Bourgeois had as an artist or as a person. What it would be you appreciate the most, had appreciated?
For me, Louise was extremely sensitive, just very perceptive, very intelligent, and yet emotionally she could be like a baby. So she had these 2 sort of polarities that really is in the work. I mean, there's always this contradictory thing existing all the time. Louise was extremely sensitive.
I would say, for me, it was her unflinching willingness to admit her vulnerabilities, both in her writing and conversation, but also, I think, making it very apparent in the work. I think in some ways it's the driving force of the work, somehow making that manifest so it's manageable. And I really respected that. I found it to be very moving.
Me? Well, I agree with both of them. And no, for me, she's just inspirational. I always say this about female artists. I always say that men just come once, just one ejaculation, but women just keep coming and coming and coming. And Louise was one of those women that just kept coming. It was never going to stop. And right up to the end of her life, she carried on working. And that, to me, is strength and determination and inspirational. I would like to be like that. Yeah, definitely.
I can't say it better. But I like this hand thing you made, Tracey.
Yeah.
That's really what I think is so extremely moving and extremely, well, poetic in a way that you had the feeling you dealt with someone who has that great experience and this ability to express it. And well, one question I would say, or perhaps two, if there are any.
Hi, my name is Mika, and I came from London. And I was just wondering, because today you spoke about the way she was not interested in the exhibitions and how her works were quite self-explanatory. But on the other hand, a lot of her work is about being confirmed by the visitors and by the audience. And I was just wondering if you could speak about this, I would say, duality in her work.
No, I think Louise made what she wanted to make, and that was the criteria. She would express what she wanted to express. If after that you got if the audience, if you responded to it or someone responded to it positively or negatively, that was after the fact. She was doing something that she needed to do that had to satisfy her own need. And that was her exclusive concern. What happened after she finished the piece, that was something else. She needed to make it, and then she would move on to the next piece. So she knew the piece would live long after her. So the reception of the work and all that is something else. She doesn't control that. It's like, if you like it, fine. If you didn't, tough shit. She didn't really care. She was just interested in what she needed to do. And the work communicated to her, it gave her access really to her unconscious and her motivations of why she was feeling this way. So for her, it was a source of knowledge. But she wasn't trying to teach anything to anyone else. She wasn't trying to teach or preach. She was focused really on trying to understand herself.
One other question, if there is one. There's no question. Thanks very much.
Thank you.